Are you crazy enough to try granulation? This video will show you how. Hey, this is James with another video in my ancient jewelry techniques series. If you're not familiar with granulation, it is essentially the fusion of small, sometimes tiny, balls of metal to a substrate, most commonly associated with gold and done by the ancient Etruscans. And here you see a variety of different historic examples of different jewelry and object types. Now, disclaimer, I am not an expert in granulation, so this will be a very basic video just showing you some initial explorations that I've had some success with. There's an example right now for you. So as a sample, I've found to gain some skill and work through some different approaches quickly. The sample that I have is about a 1/2 inch in diameter, a punch disc, usually out of 20 gauge sterling silver. And I'm arranging approximately 30 granules on there that I will get into showing how those granules are made. And then we'll cover the process of fusion. And there's a variety of different technical articles out there on how this is approached by some contemporary makers. And I'll show what I found works best for me, as well as sharing some other approaches. So let's get into it. So as I started researching this process, I found that any other contemporary makers that I reached out to generally referred back to Cogswell's article on granulation for sterling silver in Tim McCrite's Metals Technic book. And that's really what I'm going off of, and have found that I've had the most success with that. So you can start with a very thin sheet. Basically, you can put the rolling mill together and then roll your sheet through there, and you'll get a very, very thin sheet. And then you want to snip it into as small and consistent pieces as you can. Obviously, the size that you make these pieces will ultimately affect the size of the spherical granules that you'll end up with. But if you're not that consistent, you can certainly sift or sort the granules later. But here you can see the fine sheet just being snipped into those little chips. And then we'll be laying those out on a charcoal block for melting into the granules. I find that having some tools dedicated to this process is really useful and makes it a much more enjoyable process and keeps you from getting frustrated. So having some really good tweezers, since you're dealing with very small pieces, will be very helpful. And also I kind of made a custom tool for myself out of a graphite rod, typically used in mechanical pencils, set into a pin vise. And the graphite is temperature resistant, and sometimes when you're melting the chips into the granules, they can not roll off the charcoal block, and sometimes I'll use that little graphite rod to coax it along, as you will soon see. But when I'm laying out the chips on the charcoal block, I like to have them spaced. It doesn't have to be a full 1/2 inch away, but if you put them too close, then they might fuse together, and then you'll get larger granules maybe that you were planning on. So have it laid out in a grid, usually is the best way to go, and then we'll get into melting those into the granules. So the setup that I've found that works best for me is having the charcoal block set up on a tripod that is at a slight angle above a tray of water. And you want to have the distance between your melting area on the charcoal block and the tray of water far enough away that as the granules melt and roll off the charcoal block, that they stay into that sphere and harden up a bit before they hit the water, so that they keep that perfect spherical shape. If the water is too close to the melting area of the charcoal block, then it'll still be molten when it hits the water, and they won't have those nice perfect spheres that you really want for granulation. So this is the setup, and let's take a look at how the melting goes. So for the melting of the granules, I'm using a smaller torch tip on a Smith torch, and I just go through, just so I'm melting one chip at a time, because if the granules melt together, then you're going to end up with a double-sized one. So you want to be able to control the size of the granules and have them as consistent as possible. And I just go through methodically and hit each one. Sometimes if you need to coax them to roll on down more, you'll see that graphite tool that I created for that purpose. And another very important safety procedure that I should emphasize is when you're working on a charcoal block, you always want to spray it down because it can turn into an ember and be a fire hazard, even though it's not visibly on fire. So make sure that you always spray down your block whenever you're done, if you're fusing granules or soldering on a charcoal block or anything like that. So you'll see me here with the spray bottle, just spraying it down to make sure it's not going to be a fire hazard. Once you have all your granules melted and they're in the little tray of water, I know this is a little fussy point, but I find it a lot easier to place the tray of water on a white sheet of paper. So then as you're pulling out the granules and preparing to pickle them, they're a lot easier to see as opposed to the clear glass tray sitting on a messy work table that is tough to see the granules. So if you're doing all this work, you really do want to be careful about keeping track of each one. Another tip that I would recommend that I found really useful is to have a dedicated sort of tool for pickling your granules to make sure that they don't fall through small holes or anything else. So this is stainless steel, so it's safe to go in the regular pickle. You could certainly make your own by poking very small holes into a plastic container, or you could transfer pickle out into that plastic container and then remove the granules and then put it back in. But having a little tool like this makes it really easy to pickle it, and then I dunk it in a water rinse and a baking soda rinse and then back into a water rinse, so that making sure that your granules are as clean as possible, because at this scale you really don't want any oxides or anything getting in the way of that fusion point of the granule and the base metal. It's also essential that your base plate for your piece be completely cleaned, and whatever desired surface finish on your metal before you're applying the granules, because even though they will be fused and bonded to the metal, they still can be physically dislodged and removed by anything very aggressive, and certainly you're not going to take a polishing buff to it afterwards or anything like that, because it'll just flatten out those granules. So you want to make sure that all the cleaning is done on the metal that you're going to apply the granules to, and then also you want to alkalize the metal to assist in the fusion process. So you can do that with ammonia, and then the water should just sheet evenly across it. And once you've done all of that, you want to only handle the metal by its edges to prevent any sort of contamination by oils from your hands or anything like that. So you want to have your metal completely prepared before beginning to apply your granules. So obviously this is a very painstaking and precise process, so it's certainly not for everybody, and you want to approach it with a really just calm and patient mindset. So what you're seeing here is the placing of the granules. Different people approach it differently. I've applied a very thin flux to the surface of the metal, and then I'm just using tweezers and a little probe to get them placed, and then I'll adjust their position on the flux. I find that it's good to have either a very thin paste flux or a liquid flux on the surface, and some of the surface tension will help stick the granules to each other if you're arranging them in particular patterns or grids like I am in my sample pieces. If it dries out too much, don't add more flux, because that'll boil more and could dislodge your granules. So you could apply just a small dropper of distilled water onto the piece if you're finding that your granules are just rolling all over the place. And you want to be placing them onto the surface of what you're going to be soldering on. I would not recommend a honeycomb block, because your granules could roll off and get trapped into the honeycomb. So here, either working on a charcoal block or on a piece of soldering brick there. I also find that these little triangular gem sorting trays are really, really useful where you can lay out your granules, you can see the variety of different sizes and shapes, and you can pick them, and you'll get used to kind of seeing their shapes and sorting them as you go, so that you have the best and most uniform pattern for your piece. So again, just take your time, be patient with it, and just try to enjoy that process. And once you get it all settled, you're going to very carefully transport it over to your soldering station. If you do prefer to arrange the granules with a brush, some people take that approach, and you can have a brush just slightly dampened with the distilled water, and that can pick up the granules and place them. That works better for some people. And at this scale of things, actually the surface tension of the water on the brush is enough to pick up the granules and get them placed. So that's another approach that's certainly viable. Also, once you're done with this process, before you start the actual fusion process, make sure that the flux is completely dry. Because if you start applying heat, it can boil and then dislodge and undo all of the work that you've done in carefully placing your granules. So don't rush things, just take your time with it, and try to enjoy that process and not got too frustrated with it. I know that as I've been going through it, this is not something that you can rush at all. So for the fusing process in granulation, I find that a slightly lower temperature torch tends to work better, more consistently. So a propane torch or a natural gas torch, that'll, particularly with sterling silver, you'll have more consistent success and less of a risk of overheating the sterling and causing reticulation or something like that, because this is a fusing process where the copper and the silver is interacting and lowering its melting point at the point of contact with the flux and causing that fusion. So it's quite a challenging process, and also holding it at that temperature that is at the fusing point without actually melting the granules or the base plate can also be quite trying on the nerves at times, depending how much work you've put into the piece. But you can always revisit it and fuse more granules if not all of them fuse. So that's another option as well. But you can see here, this video is not sped up, and it's just holding that temperature at that fusion point for a period of time to let it to occur and get a really good bond going. So you can see that it takes time. And as you're learning any new skill, you're certainly going to have obstacles and failures that might come up. And so I wanted to share this video where I just went in with the torch a bit too hot and a bit too quickly. And what you're going to see happen is the sterling silver base plate is going to just quickly overheat and reticulate. And so I just figured I wanted to show that occurring. And again, this video is real time. So I was holding it at the melting point, and then just got everything a bit too hot. And so you'll see that kind of wrinkling occur. And that is inevitable sometimes as you're learning something new. So here's a little detail of how that piece ended up. Now, you could certainly take that approach and do it on purpose if you like that wrinkled, reticulated sort of finish on silver. That's certainly something that you could incorporate into your own work. But I just wanted to share some of my own challenges as I've been exploring this process. So this is one of my basic samples that I consider acceptably successful. Obviously, it's not quite at the level of the ancient Etruscans even yet, but it's certainly a good start on the process, and I'm intrigued to see what happens next. Another contemporary practitioner that has really done some wonderful work with gold is Doug Harling, and he has a different approach that I think works really well with gold, and it's published in Penland's Book of Jewelry, and you can check out that process. But I figure most of the people interested in the video would be focusing on sterling silver just to get a start with the process. So good luck, and I hope it goes well for you. If you enjoyed this video, please be sure to hit that subscribe button so that you can hear from me when I post future videos. Thanks for stopping by.